we saw this glow of light, just this kind of a halo of a light, just kind of beaming out.
He wanted to tell me about a crash of some sort of craft that had occurred on his ranch.
He would wad it up in his hand. When it hit the table, it spread out just like water with no wrinkles.
And it looked like there was a hieroglyphic type writing written along the inside surface of the I-beam.
They had no earlobes. They had 2 ear canals, 2 very small orifices for the nose, a concave face.
Oh yes, it was a cover-up from the beginning.
How it began. After the 4th of July holiday weekend in 1947, the local sheriff, George Wilcox, received a report by a rancher named William Mac Brazel, claiming that he might have recovered the remains of one of them flying saucers. Military authorities were then contacted by Wilcox at the nearby Roswell Army Airfield, where Major Jesse Marcel was assigned to investigate. He, as well as Sheridan Cabot and Louis Rickett, 2 counterintelligence corps agents, arrived at the ranch where Brazel examined and collected the wreckage. The Public Information Office at Roswell, AAF, announced the discovery of remains from the flying disc on July 8th. Brigadier General Roger Ramey, who had examined the wreckage at Carswell Air Force Base, also known as Fort Worth, held a press conference the next day, with Major Marcel attending, announcing that the wreckage was simply a destroyed weather balloon. In one fell swoop, the Roswell story was dead, seemingly explained, and its status as a dead story would continue for decades. However, Marcel met Stanton Friedman, a UFO researcher, by happenstance in 1978. To Friedman, this was a golden opportunity to expose what he thought to be a government conspiracy, and the high-ranking Marcel was just the kind of witness who could lend some credence to a supposed cover-up of a spaceship and even little green men. With this unfortunate event, the Roswell mythos once again rose from the ashes, and Friedman had gusto like very few conspiracy advocates have ever had. Witnesses. For decades, some persistent claims about the amounts of supposed eyewitnesses to the UFO crash in Roswell have flourished. The claims are anywhere from 10 witnesses to hundreds. Friedman, as well as author Bill Moore, claim to have interviewed at least about 100 witnesses when writing their book, The Roswell Incident, in 1980. In another book called The Truth About the UFO Crash at Roswell, authors Kevin Randall and Donald Schmidt claim to have interviewed at least 70 witnesses. However, anyone looking into all these testimonies will find, unsurprisingly perhaps, that most originate from second-hand witnesses, and some remaining witnesses can't even have their connection to the incident verified in any way. If we focus on Bill Moore, we find that although he interviewed many more people, only 25 testimonies are written about, and 18 of them are second-hand. The very few remaining first-hand testimonies are also subpar, and one of the people who claimed to actually have seen and interacted with the unknown material of interest does not believe it to be of alien origin, but instead that it was man-made. Flaws of the human memory. A recurring myth about the testimonies regarding Roswell, coming from the pro-conspiracy camp, is that all of the witnesses, at least the first-hand witnesses, are all very similar and precise. As such, they argue there must be something to the testimonies. It's clear, though, most of these people making this claim either have not actually read the testimonies or are lying, as even a superficial glance will show that even the first-hand testimonies have many and also wide differences regarding both what occurred and even when. As mentioned before, the interviews for the books to be written started in 1978, which obviously is more than 3 decades after the events at Roswell. Even if these witnesses, even the first-hand witnesses, had pure intentions and were as truthful as can be, it's a hard pill to swallow to suggest that there would not be plentiful of blanks of their memories and also subsequent fillings of such voids with their imagination. It's been shown time and time again that events fade from people's memories, and not only that, we also today know that the human memory is not just a static ledger of data gathered throughout one's life, but it is in fact dynamic. It's malleable to changes, brought on not just by the extended periods of time, but also by one's own biases and suggestive input from one's environment and other individuals. This becomes clear with the so-called star witness, Major Marcel, as when he, in the very first interview done, could not even remember the actual year of the event, 1947, and instead could just say it happened during the later half of the 1940s. Let's take a look at some other examples of witnesses whose testimonies are lacking at best and laughable at worst.
Loretta Proctor is 83 and still lives on the same ranch near Corona, north of Roswell. She remembers Brazel arriving on horseback with a collection of strange material.
He showed us this piece that looked like plastic or wood of some kind, and he said that there was some metallic looking stuff that when you crushed it, it just straightened right back out. It wouldn't stay crushed. And there was some beams or something that he said had kind of pinkish purple printing on it. Well, we told him it's probably a UFO and he should report it.
Loretta Proctor was the neighbor of Mac Brazel, the discoverer of the debris. She supposedly attempted to destroy a piece of the exotic material shown to her by Brazel. However, this turned out to be impossible. In reality, though, she made changes and retcons to her testimony many times. In her original testimony, she never observed any debris. Yet in the later ones, she apparently tried to destroy the material. Lydia Sleppy was operating a teletype machine where she announced the finding of the debris when the machine stopped working, only to then reanimate and broadcast a message from the FBI, directing her to stop broadcasting in the interest of national security. However, there is zero evidence that the FBI even attempted to contact Lydia through this unorthodox manner, nor would they even be able to. The teletype machine Lydia used requires the operator to throw a receiver switch for an incoming signal to be received in the first place. Sergeant Melvin E. Brown claimed to have observed alien corpses according to many authors who have written about Roswell. However, he died in 1986 and was never actually interviewed by any of them. The claim that he saw the corpses originates from his daughter, Beverly Bean, years after his passing. No other relative or acquaintance offers support to her claim. To add further reasons as to not trust this claim is that Brown was a mere cook, with no security clearance and had never done guard duty. What does the Major say? That Jesse Marcel was a Major, and a damn good one, is not and has never been in dispute. However, this does not mean he's a reliable witness. Looking into his military file, it becomes clear that he's had a past of obvious exaggerations. This is clear in the writings of his superior, the commander of Roswell's base during the event in 1947. Among the many outrageous claims from Major Marcel is that he himself transported by air the craft found at Roswell. This is simply not true, and cannot be true, as he was not trained in piloting planes or helicopters in any way. Marcel claimed to Friedman that he had a bachelor's degree in physics. However, the institutions he claims to have attended tell a different story. He never even set foot on one university, and he never finished his education at the other. Also, in his military file, he said he had no such degree under oath. The reason that Marcel's file is especially credible, and why it proves him to be either delusional or a liar regarding his claims given to Friedman, is that his signature is present over and over again. In other words, Marcel himself attests in writing to the veracity of his documents. The cover-up. Although we now know that Marcel was either delusional or a liar, and as such we can rule him out as a so-called star witness, it is still a fact, however, that he was indeed involved in the transport of the debris to Carswell AFB, and was at his supervisor's office when the official explanation of the debris simply being a weather balloon was announced. So, is his claim of a cover-up in any way true? Actually, the idea that there was a government cover-up regarding the debris, whatever the nature of that debris was, is supported by Colonel Thomas J. Dubois, the assistant of General Ramey, the supervisor of Marcel. He claimed that the cover-up was designed to get the press taken off Ramey's back in a hurry. But if this debris truly was nothing more than a mere weather balloon, why was there a cover-up? What was it? Major Marcel claimed that the debris depicted in photos taken at Ramey's office is not the same extraterrestrial material that was brought from the ranch. The debris in the photos is a weather balloon, but the claim is that it was presented instead as a means of the cover-up. However, since we know of Marcel's history of lies, there's no reason to even entertain this claim. To get closer to the truth, we will focus on the people who were actually present when the photos were taken in Ramey's office: Irving Newton and Colonel Dubois. What does the Brigadier say? Colonel Thomas J. Dubois, who would later become a Brigadier General, was one of two people present when the photos were taken. This is known because he personally met the B-29 during arrival at Carswell AFB, also known as Fort Worth. He then proceeded to carry the material by hand to the office of Ramey.
In 1947, General Ramey's Chief of Staff was Colonel Thomas Dubois. Shortly before he died, he was interviewed on home video. As a retired Brigadier General, he is the highest-ranking officer ever to comment on the Roswell incident.
It was a cover story. The balloon part of it is the story that's to be given to the press, and that is it, and anything else, forget it. And McMullen, if you ever knew him, if you told him that he wanted to run something, he goddamn sure ran it. He knew every facet of the operation. He's a busybody. He wanted to know what the hell was going on, who was pissing on the sidewalk, and all that sort of thing.
General McMullen, the deputy head of Strategic Air Command at the Pentagon, was in charge of the entire operation, according to General Dubois.
McMullen told me, you are not to discuss this, and this is a point of which this is more than top secret, as he said. It's beyond that. It's within my priority as deputy to George Kenney, and he in turn responsible to the president. This is the highest priority you can exhibit, and you will say nothing, and that's the end of it.
Some fairly entertaining interviews have been done with Dubois where he adamantly denies any claim made by Marcel. Here are some excerpts. There are two researchers, Schmidt and Randall, who are presently saying that the debris in General Ramey's office had been switched and that you men had a weather balloon there in its place. Oh bull! That material was never switched. So what you're saying is that the material in General Ramey's office was the actual debris brought in from Roswell. That's absolutely right. From the final interview. Did you get a chance to read the material and look at the pictures? Yes, and I studied the pictures very carefully. Do you recognize that material? Oh yes, that's the material that Marcel brought into Fort Worth from Roswell. It's clear there were no substitutes for any spaceship, and what Marcel brought was indeed what was photographed for the public. The gravity of what Newton has to say.
The general called and said, "Get your ass over here to my office. We got something here we want you to look at." And aye, sir. And he says, "If you've got a car, fine. If you haven't, get one. Get the first means of transportation and get over to my office." And when I saw that, I said, "Is that your flying saucer?" And they said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, hell no. That's a Raven target and balloon. And if it isn't," I said, "I'd eat it without salt or pepper. I know what that is." "Are you sure?" "Yes, I'm sure. I know what that is."
Irving Newton was the other person present when the photos were taken. When looking at the photos of the debris, he confirmed that what is shown is the same material that he observed. He also complained about the frequent misquoting that's been done to him by various people like Friedman. Marcel's claims about how a spaceship was covered up has been refuted. However, there is one thing Marcel was correct about, which is even confirmed by Dubois. There was actually a cover-up. Of what? Dubois himself has stated that he doesn't know, although he has stated that even if that thing was a weather balloon, it was not an ordinary weather balloon, contrary to what was claimed at the time. Project Mogul. To understand the true nature of what was found at Roswell, we need to go further back in time, before 1947, to a scientist named Maurice Ewing. The following clip I'm about to show is a lecture from Richard A. Mueller, where he talks about the discovery of the so-called sound channel, and how Maurice Ewing tried to use it to give the US an advantage during the Second World War.
Newspaper in Roswell, New Mexico on 1947 had an interesting headline. Said that the United States had captured a crashed flying saucer. Interesting history to this as you look back into it. The United States announced that they had recovered some flying discs. The newspapers reported this. Flying saucers captured, Roswell, New Mexico. Next day, the U.S. Issued a correction. They had not captured or recovered a flying saucer at all. In fact, all they had recovered was a crashed weather balloon. Anybody who had been at the site or had seen photos of the site, there'd been a lot of people like this, knew the U.S. government was lying. 1995, the U.S. government officially announced that, in fact, in 1947, they lied. They lied on purpose. They lied because they did not want the people of the United States or the people of the world to know one of their most highly classified military secrets. So today I will tell you what really happened in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947 about the military secret. It is no longer classified, but it's a little bit different than many people thought. So we'll talk about what happened there. As a prelude to that, because a key character in the 1947 events was a physicist named Maurice Ewing, who you may not have heard about. Maurice Ewing. At the beginning of World War II, he was studying the oceans, and he came up with a rather amazing discovery, which was one of the most classified aspects of World War II. And based on that discovery, he came up with an extremely clever invention. And let me tell you about this invention, just to present it as a mystery. Imagine how useful this is and how difficult it is to figure out how it works. Imagine you're the enemy, for example, and you capture an American pilot who was shot down over the Pacific. In his emergency kit, he had these spheres. They were called SOFAR spheres. S-O-F-A-R, SOFAR spheres. And his instructions were, if he gets shot down over the Pacific, to drop one overboard. And then wait. if nothing happens, if 8 hours later nobody has picked you up, you drop another. Now this is the Pacific Ocean. And let's say you're on a mission where you got thrown off by a storm, or maybe someone was chasing you, and you're hundreds of miles from where anybody expected you to be, and you get shot down, and here you are in the ocean, and your instructions are, open up your emergency kit, there's some extra water in there, a little bit of food. Don't send a radio signal, because if you send a radio signal, the enemy might pick it up and know where you are and go and capture you. Instead, drop the sphere overboard. And if you do that, a few hours later, the planes will come and pick you up. This was the invention of spheres. If you found it, if you were the enemy and you learned this, and here's this guy and he said he's supposed to drop these overboard, and you have one, and say, well, let's see how it works. So you cut it open and it turns out it's a hollow metal sphere with nothing inside, just big empty space. That's it. How could that work? What Maurice Ewing had discovered was deep down in the ocean, there was a phenomenon that we now call the sound channel. We're going to be talking a lot about the sound channel and how sound moves and the essence of the sound channel for the whole flying saucer story. Deep down under the ocean, you have molecules. Suppose you make a sound in the ocean. Now, Ewing had a clever idea for making a sound in the ocean. It was you take a metal sphere and you make it hollow. This hollow metal sphere will take a lot of pressure. You make the metal sphere, even though it's hollow, if you make it out of the right metal, you'll make it heavier than an equal amount of water. If it's lighter than an equal amount of water, it'll float. That's why wood floats. If it's heavier than an equal amount of water, it will sink and keep on sinking. So his idea was give the down pilot a metal sphere, a hollow metal sphere, more dense than water. He'll throw it overboard. This thing will sink into the ocean, and it'll sink and sink and sink and keep on sinking. Now, as it gets under the water, you have the weight of the water above it. As it gets deeper, the pressure increases. You get deeper and deeper and deeper, and the pressure gets greater and greater. And finally, you get to the pressure that's greater than the palm of your hands. You get down. He designed it so it would break at a depth of about 1 kilometer, 1,000 meters. When it gets down there, it starts to break, and at that point, it's like an egg. Once you bent it and it's beginning to break, the thing goes catastrophically, and the enormous pressure brings it in. And in fact, what happens when it comes in like that is, bang, it makes a wave. So Maurice Ewing had invented a way for a pilot to take an egg, called a SOFAR sphere, drop it overboard, it would fall down, drop down, it would sink to about 1 kilometer, and when it got to a depth of 1 kilometer, the pressure was such that it would catastrophically collapse and it would make a loud noise. Basically, the water on both sides of this thing banging suddenly against each other would make a pop just like the clapping of my hands. A very loud pop because of the enormous pressure in this thing. So you'd make sound underwater. Now, water is like air. You move a molecule and you bounce it, and it will move the molecule next to it. And that'll move the molecule next to that, and so on and so on and so on. So you get a sound wave going. Here's how it works. You get down to 1 kilometer, and you make this sound. And yeah, some of the sound goes up. That actually does go up. Some of the sound goes straight down. That actually goes to the ground. Some of it goes horizontally, and that goes great distances. But the sound that goes at an angle is bent. The sound doesn't go in a straight line. What happens is it's bent like this, and then it's bent back up, and it's bent like this, and so on. And so the sound that goes at this angle is also bent. And the sound that goes at this angle is also bent. And so on. The sound that goes at this angle is also bent. And the result is the sound that goes like this escapes. But some of the sound, about half of the sound, gets trapped into this virtual surface. And because it's trapped, it doesn't spread out as much. And because it doesn't spread out as much, it can go really long distances and still be heard. You have a microphone, and you hear ping. Say, whoops, we have a soldier, we have a pilot down in the water. He just released a SOFAR sphere. What do you do with that ping? What you need is more than one ping. Suppose the pilot is right here, and you have 1,000 miles away. You have a microphone here, another one here, another one here. This one you'll hear it first because that's the closest. Then you get this one and this one. If you know the distance to 3 of these microphones, you can tell where it is. What you do is you look at it and hear when the sound comes in. If the microphones were all equidistant, the sound would all come in at the same time. You know it's in the center of the circle. Not hard math. If they're not equidistant, you just listen to when they come in, and you can find the unique location where the sound would have reached those microphones in that order with that spacing. And that's what he did. You put down these microphones at various places. He had them on the Hawaiian Islands. And if you hear this ping, you know where the pilot is, you send an airplane there. But the marvelous thing is, if you found one of these spheres, you wouldn't think it was a secret anything, because it only works because of the sound channel. End of World War II, Maurice Ewing thinking about the atmosphere. And he realizes there's a sound channel in the atmosphere. How does he realize that? I felt really stupid in 1995 when I read all of this. The reason is, I knew all the physics. Why did I never realize there would be a sound channel in the atmosphere? So, let's take a look at the atmosphere. Here we are in the ground. And sometimes it's pretty warm down here. But as you get up higher, it gets cool. Just because expanding air, if the wind happens to blow some air up, the air expands. When the air expands, it gets cool. So you get cool air up here. But if you get high enough, you get to the ozone layer, and then it gets warm again. Warm because of the ozone. The ozone absorbs the ultraviolet radiation from the sun, protects us from the ultraviolet radiation of the sun, but makes this warm area that's called the stratosphere. Here's the wave traveling. The bottom is slowed down because this is getting into the fast part, and so it bends. And the wave, you'll trap sound in the sound channel. And so it doesn't spread out. So if you want to actually make a sound that's heard around the world, the best place to go is up in the sound channel. Now, if birds were as big as whales, maybe they would do this. They go up to the sound channel and go, chip, 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 and the sound would go around the world. We know of no animals that make use of the sound channel, except for Maurice Ewing. His idea was the following. 1945, the US has exploded a nuclear bomb. A nuclear bomb is very, you get this explosion, then you have this very hot amount of air, very, very hot. Because it's very hot, it starts to rise. That's what we call the mushroom cloud. But some parts are hotter than others, so this thing is very turbulent. A nuclear bomb first had the blast, then you have this really turbulent hot air that makes a roar. So the initial sound may be very loud, but then you have this roaring sound because of the hot turbulent air that's rising. When this hot air gets up to the sound channel, it's making a lot of sound. When it gets to the sound channel, that sound will not spread out as much. It will basically travel around the sound channel for thousands of miles. So what use is this? It's not loud enough to do any damage. Well, back in 1945, the United States was seriously worried about the Soviet Union. We knew that they were building a nuclear bomb too. How could we tell when they succeeded? Ewing's idea was, let's go up to the sound channel and listen. If he makes a nuclear bomb, by the time it gets up to the sound channel, just below the stratosphere, the sound will travel around the world. So this was Ewing's idea. Let's put some microphones in the sound channel. Now this was a highly classified program. It was about as classified as anything got back in 1945 because it was relating to nuclear weapons. And we didn't want the Russians to know that we could listen in to their nuclear weapons tests. We could tell where they were by how the sound arrived from different directions. So we would know the location where they were testing them, just like we knew the location of the pilot from his SOFAR spheres. You put these microphones up at various places around the world, so we can get all sorts of information. We didn't want them knowing about this. So it was highly classified. It was classified along with nuclear weapons. Now, to put a microphone up here, we're talking about putting microphones up at the top of the thunderheads and keeping them up there for long periods of time. Moreover, they have to listen, so you want it to be a quiet environment. So we had this idea that you would put it up with balloons. It's a natural way to do it. You require very big balloons to be able to keep the microphones up there that long. The project was called Project Mogul. In 1945, Project Mogul was to take these microphones. Now, the best microphones they had, you'll see this in old movies. You watch the movie Aviator, and you'll see the movies they had. Microphones then were high-tech, and they were difficult. And the problem was when you have a microphone, you put it on a stand, and little vibrations of the ground and the stand would be picked up by the microphone. It was called microphonics. If you have a microphone that's attached to something, it's sitting on the table, it picks up these microphonics, and you get all these vibrations and squeals and noises and so on. So what they had to do is suspend the microphone. What they would do is they would take the microphone and have a delicate wire coming out of it to carry the signal, and they suspend this on springs. And you'll see this in the old movies. And they'll put the spring on a disc like this. And then this is the disc microphone. Ewing flew these disc microphones from my friend Athelstan Spilhouse's balloon up into this area where the sound layer was, and he would fly these balloons. Where do you fly them from? Well, this is all highly classified. What is being done with these balloons? Well, we're detecting nuclear explosions. It's all classified. We don't talk about that. There was only one location in the United States where you could do the following two things. One was a place where you could have nuclear weapons secrets. Because this was the place where our nuclear bombers were based. This is where they kept the nuclear bombs. This was the Army Air Base in Roswell, New Mexico. So Ewing was listening with these balloons, these large balloons, these were much larger than weather balloons. And they had, I have the images of these things. They're on the website. You can look at them. These huge balloons with long strings of microphones that would hang down. So you have this huge balloon, hundreds of feet in diameter, strings of microphones hung down. They had special reflectors on them so that people could locate it, so that the people who were running this would be able to locate exactly where that balloon was. Because when the sound signal arrived, they had to be able to tell the direction it was coming from. And to do that, they had to know the position of this. So they had special radar reflectors on it. We'll talk more about those. So this thing would hang from the sky with these microphones and would send radio signals back down when the microphone picked up anything, and indeed they picked up the first nuclear test of the Soviet Union. So this was a successful program until it was displaced by the seismic detection signal. One of these huge things crashed, 1947, outside of Roswell, New Mexico. And the people, the Air Force put out a press release saying that our flying disc microphones had crashed. Actually, from the jargon of the day, they just called them flying discs, it turned out. It's sort of like calling a radio receiver a radio, or a microwave oven a microwave. They were calling these things the flying discs. And they announced that their flying discs some flying discs had crashed when they recovered them. Was picked up by the newspapers as flying saucers. That's how they interpreted it. Now, the guy who announced that this classified program with the flying disc microphones had crashed got into big trouble, and they immediately retracted the press release and said, no, it was just a weather balloon. It was a lie. Interesting issue. Should the government ever lie to its own people? Back then, they made the considered decision that the right thing to do was to lie, because this program, you think back why it really required so much secrecy. Was there some way the Soviets could have hidden this kind of a test if they knew about it? I think the worry was more that they would pick up on our tests. I'm not sure, but it was a highly classified program. Some information had leaked out, so they countered it with a lie. And this was done on purpose. The records have all been declassified, including long interviews with my friend Althustan Spillhouse describing the program. It was actually several senators who insisted that the government publish this stuff and declassify it. Now there are all these huge documents describing this. When it came out, my reaction was, oh, am I dumb? Why didn't I think of that? Of course. The sound channel in the atmosphere. Anyway, it's a fascinating story. Since 1995, the story has been written up in many magazines, what really happened. I've just given you what really happened. But of course, I may be lying and just trying to cover what's the story of the UFOs who are now collaborating with us and actually living here in parallel with us, these aliens, and I'm just not allowed to tell you that I am an alien or something like that. Anyway, that's the story of Roswell.
Dr. Ian West is one of Britain's leading forensic pathologists. He is frequently called upon by Scotland Yard in murder investigations.
The blood pattern is unusual. You don't normally get, that incision's been open for some time now. We've got 4 little trails running from it. Although we have a number of quite distinct linear trails, dark trails, which look like blood trails, they're not of the nature that I would expect to see at post-mortem. I would see some more smearing, some more irregularity in the blood loss from the margins of the incision. One has seen one distinctive organ removed from the upper central abdominal region. It's of the size of a liver, but it's not of the liver shape, and it's not in the liver position. I've seen no intestines that I can distinguish. I can't distinguish the thoracic organs. It certainly doesn't resemble, from what one can see here, any human remains that I've ever seen. There's just no evidence to say this is definitely nothing on the film which makes me say this is definitely a hoax. My feeling is that probably about 98% feeling is that this is probably a man-made hoax. I have, as I say, a 2% area where I don't know.
In my opinion, I think it's a special effect. It's man-made. It's a good special effect. It's not going to be a cheap item. It's going to be, a few $100,000 probably. It's difficult to say when something like that could have been made. Certainly in the 60s they were doing things at Hammer which were very similar. I would guess that it was not before the 60s, but sort of mid-60s I would think would be the earliest it could be. I don't think anyone could be certain that it's a special effect. I mean, how do I know what the inside of aliens look like? No one knows. I know what the inside of foam rubber and polyurethane foam looks like, and it looks very similar.